Warning, the video you're about to watch contains foul language and bodily harm, and things much, much worse. If you're prepared, keep watching. Number 15. Shamu attacks. Ken Peters trains killer whales at the SeaWorld attraction in San Diego, California. In July of 2012, he is putting on a performance with one of several whales they use to portray the famous SeaWorld mascot, Shamu. Even though the 30-year-old whale has been raised in captivity her whole life, she is still 5,000 pounds and also a dominant female. In other words, she has the mentality of a pack leader and can become dangerous at any time, as Ken would quickly find out. If the stunt had gone as planned, the whale would have launched Ken high in the air and let him land safely back into the water. Instead, Shamu decides to grab his foot and pull him under. For more than a minute, she does barrel rolls with him and basically treats him like a ragdoll as she races across the tank with his foot still in her jaws. Her great strength easily breaks the bones in Ken's foot as he is dragged along. She lets Ken up for a quick breath of air, but it's not over yet. She then pulls him down again for even longer this time. When she lets him up for breath a third time, Ken makes soft cooing noises at her and uses training gestures in hopes of regaining control. The other nearby trainers know not to jump in and save him because that would just excite the 2-ton sea beast even more. Instead, Ken comforts her and pats her on the back while his co-workers watch alongside with the rest of the tense crowd. Finally, Shamu lets go and Ken makes a break for it. His broken ankle crumples and he falls into a heap after a few steps, but he's now safe. Killer whales are extremely intelligent, so Shamu knew exactly what she was doing. Not only was she asserting her dominance over Ken and reminding him who's boss, but she was also using him to entertain herself, not the other way around as was normal. What could have easily ended Ken's life was to her little more than just a fun game. Number 14. Gone with the Wind. James Stimson was driving home from work one day in Layton, Utah, when he noticed the rain and winds were picking up. Suddenly, dark grey clouds rolled in and the wind picked up even more. James began recording just as the tornado came ripping through. To his left, the entire roof of a building is ripped off and goes sailing into the air while lightning streaks the sky. Chunks of paneling rip across the street at a high rate of speed and pummel his windshield. Up ahead, James said that he could see young children pressed up against an SUV with a crossing guard, trying their best to stay safe. Number 13. The shaky Russian bridge. While Minnesota motorists are busy flying into the air, Russian drivers were in for a bumpy ride themselves after powerful gusts of wind began to violently shake a new bridge in the southern Russian city of Volgograd. The strong winds literally threw cars into the air and into other lanes. Many people thought it was an earthquake, though experts find this theory unlikely. The 40-mile-per-hour winds on that day are much more convincing, they say. The 4.5-mile bridge took 13 years to build, yet it could have easily been gone in a single day as it bounced up and down more than 3 feet. The screeching the bridge made was deafening. The Russian president called for an investigation to figure out what was wrong and how to fix it. 2 years later, in 2012, the bridge was fixed with 12 dampers that weighed over 1,000 pounds each, making it too heavy to shake. During those 2 years, however, crossing over on a windy day was a bit of Russian roulette. Number 12. Just like Mama used to break. Homemade water slides seem like a recipe for disaster. Case in point, this viral video from a Texas man named David Salmon. In July of this year, David and his friends were taking turns riding down a backyard water slide in Austin. That is, until a disaster strikes. David whips down the water slide at full speed. He's going too fast and tries to slow himself down with his arm, but it's to no avail. He goes over the edge of the slide and flies off. It's a 15-foot drop straight down a rocky cliff. The harsh landing leaves him with fractured ribs, a broken arm, and a body full of cuts and bruises. To make matters worse, paramedics had a hard time getting to him because of the rural location of the slide, as well as all of the rocks. Number 11. Don't do fake drugs. 4 unnamed teenagers are smoking a synthetic drug called spice. As you probably already know, this product was often sold in gas stations as incense. The leaves are sprayed with chemicals and can be smoked for a cheap and legal high. As one unlucky teenager was about to find out though, a spice high can have horrible effects. The young man lets out a big cloud of smoke and starts to look off into the distance. His friends are laughing at his confused facial expression. That is, until he projectile vomits, falls backwards off the bench and begins convulsing in the grass. His friends are too high themselves to help. Instead, they question out loud what it must feel like as he vomits high over his head and starts gurgling. His identity and fate have never been revealed. Number 10. Minnesota belt buckles. Intense heat warped a patch of busy highway over the summer in Little Canada, Minnesota, and transformed it into a terrifying ramp. The road buckle in the westbound lane was small enough to be hidden from sight, but large enough to send drivers flying high into the air at high speeds once they hit it. A nearby traffic camera was able to catch all of the chaos on tape. Plenty of cars went flying, but luckily, no one hits the bump while on a motorcycle. Somehow, a serious pileup was avoided long enough for the Department of Transportation to close the area off and start fixing it. But before then, dozens of cars hit the speed bump while traveling at highway speeds, giving a whole new meaning to jump scares. Number 9. Russian bonfire. An SUV full of scared Russian men are trying desperately to navigate their way through a raging forest fire. The entire landscape is a hazy bright orange that makes it difficult for them to see their surroundings. Only the brightest and most intense of flame patches can be seen through the choking smoke. Happy pop music plays on the radio as they try not to burn alive. The group remains remarkably calm for the most of the video, occasionally cursing under their breath in a flat voice. There are 2 moments in particular, however, where sheer panic does seem to creep into their hurried dialogues. The first moment is when the driver gets lost off-road and needs to drive in reverse, and the other is when one of them foolishly decides to open the window and accidentally lets in some toxic air. After what surely feels to them to be an eternity, they spot the red headlights of a car up farther ahead that guides them to safety. The orange haze parts are replaced with a blue sky. It's finally over. This video is from the summer of 2010, when hundreds of separate wildfires just like this one consumed nearly 700 square miles of Russian soil in one single day. Number 8. Shark bait. In southwestern Australia, a herd of pregnant sperm whales accidentally strand themselves on the beach. A crew of researchers approach the scene on boat, but they aren't the only ones attracted to the whales. The researchers are immediately surrounded by 30 frenzied great white sharks. Blood from the whales has turned the waters completely red, and the sharks are ready to feast. Within 3 minutes of arriving, one of the filmmakers, a man named Dan Riggs, notices that one of the sharks appears to be looking at them. Its massive head is literally above the water as it regards them. One of the crew dips a pole-mounted camera under the water for a better shot, and the shark lunges at it. After circling around them 3 or 4 times, the great white did the unthinkable. The gigantic predator swam to the very bottom of the 20-feet waters and then came charging straight up. It slammed into the bottom of the boat. Dan Riggs and his crew held onto the sides for dear life as it tried to flip them into the water, where dozens of other sharks were waiting. The great white repeated this no less than 3 times until they managed to beat it back with their oars. What they caught on tape was truly terrifying. Number 7. The Blinking Saint. According to the legend of Saint Innocence, a young Roman girl is banned by her father from practicing Catholicism 300 years ago. She defies him by befriending a nun and joining the Catholic Church. Her father stabs her to death for this religious betrayal. Her remains were taken to the Cathedral of Guadalajara in Mexico, where they are considered an ancient relic. She is made a saint. Her corpse is dipped in wax and dressed in a white gown to symbolize purity. It has since become a major tourist attraction, especially when it blinked on camera. Number 6. Stalked and abducted. This harrowing footage shows just how easy it is to get taken in a public place. A Los Angeles man has been stalking a woman that he has found attractive for quite some time now. Finally, his impulses take over and he literally makes a grab for her while at the convenience store she works at. She desperately pleads with him to stop as he takes her by both of her wrists and walks backwards with her out of the door. You would think that an attack in a public area would be quickly stopped, but not on that day. A mailman steps right over her and does absolutely nothing to try and help. Later, he would confess that he wasn't sure if they were a couple in an argument or even if they were just kidding around. Apparently, she did not call for help. She tripped the alarm, but she's dragged off camera and left to fight on her own before police can arrive. Next, a street camera catches the stalker as he stuffs his victim headfirst into the backseat of his red Honda Civic. The inside door handle has been removed. He drives her to a nearby cemetery. He has a hammer, a knife, and multiple screwdrivers. He said that he was going to bury her alive. She escaped only by jumping out of the window and rushing to a group of nearby mourners. The police caught him hours later. The man's name is Jose Caro. He is 28 years old and has been stalking his poor victim for quite some time. At first, he tried to intimidate her into having a relationship with her by threatening her family. After he couldn't figure out where she lived, he decided to snatch her at her place of work instead. This all happened just last month in September. Number 5. Under Siege. This footage captures the horrifying moment an ISIS terrorist detonates a suicide bomb vest inside of their Paris apartment after being cornered by police. After receiving convincing information of a terrorist cell armed with assault rifles and explosive belts, French authorities raided a number of hotels and houses in Saint-Denis. These were the same terrorists responsible for the multiple Paris attacks in 2015. One apartment was held under siege for 1 hour, starting at 4:30 in the morning. Here, police fired almost 5,000 bullets and threw multiple grenades as they made their way through the building. They reach the apartment number where they think one of the terrorist masterminds is staying and bang on the door. His cousin, a 26-year-old woman named Hasna Ait Bulhassen, argues with them on the other side of the door. What they don't know is that she is wearing a suicide bomber's vest. After a short exchange of words, she detonates the vest. A neighbor in an adjacent apartment catches the huge fireball as Hasna flies out of the window. Her head and spine hit the road below. An investigation reveals that she tried to become a police officer years ago, but was denied. This was most likely so she could perform a massive terrorist operation while wearing a uniform. Aside from the terrifying video, her last conversation on this earth before the explosion was also recorded by police. Number 4. The Wedding Crashers. The Versailles Wedding Hall in Jerusalem became the site of a national disaster on May 24, 2001, when Karen and Asaf Droer were getting married. As about 700 of their friends and family are dancing and celebrating the momentous occasion, the entire floor buckles and gives way. The music cuts abruptly and about 380 guests all fall down a newly created black hole, many of them women and children. Among the bodies are the bride and groom, who are both injured but still alive. Hundreds of screams fill the air along with choking dust and debris. Terror grips the surviving guests as they search for their loved ones and see who is still alive. By the end of this terrible ordeal, 23 people are killed and hundreds more are injured. A police investigation revealed that the tragedy occurred after the owners had decided to add a third floor when the design was only equipped to safely handle 2 stories. This, combined with the removal of a support beam during a later renovation, is what created this horrific disaster. Even the Prime Minister of Israel himself took notice and gave his condolences. In 2005, 2 of the owners were sentenced to 2.5 years in prison each, and the third one was sentenced to 4 months of community service. The video itself is nothing short of horrifying. Even if you don't understand their words, the language of grief is universal. Number 3. Chaos at the stadium. A famous soccer stadium called Valley Parade became the site of one of the worst fires in modern history. On May 11th, 1985, more than 11,000 fans were crammed into the stadium to watch the final Division 3 game of the season when it caught on fire, killing 56 fans. Thousands of bodies began pouring over the rafters in order to get away, some smoking and some still on fire. Witnesses ran away in horror as flaming chunks of debris fell on them. Nobody was safe from the trampling mob. Families were split up and desperately looked for each other. Some even desperately head back into the wreckage to find the ones they love. The fire is believed to have been accidentally caused by an Australian man named Eric Bennett, who, according to one witness, did not properly extinguish his cigarette butt. Eric's nephew has since come forward to say that there was no possible way this is true. However, the detectives who recreated the scene say that 2 Australian men had tickets for seats that were extremely close to where the blaze began. Number 2. The tsunami. In 2011, a massive earthquake rocked northeastern Japan. The earthquake was so large that it was felt around the entire world. Tokyo had less than 1 minute to react. It wasn't much time, but in those 60 seconds, an emergency service automatically stopped high-speed trains and factory assembly lines, saving countless lives. Just when shocked Japanese citizens thought the worst was over, a giant tsunami devastated the country further. The natural disaster caused over $500 billion in damages. More than 1.2 million buildings were damaged and almost 20,000 people were tragically killed, with yet another 27,000 injured. This horrifying footage catches the terrible overflooding that devastated entire cities. You can see the waterline start to move backwards at first, which is what always happens before a tsunami strikes. Once the tsunami is finished sucking up the water, massive waves then crash over the barrier. The rushing water carries boats and beeping cars deeper into the city. By the end of the video, entire buildings are underwater. Number 1. The Great White. The Great White is the name of a hair metal band that was semi-famous during the 1980s. They would become famous again in 2003, but this time for an entirely different reason. They would accidentally start the worst nightclub fire in United States history. The Great White was having a reunion show at a gig called The Station in Rhode Island. When they went on at 11 o'clock that night, a white-hot shower of pyrotechnics went off behind them. What the stage technicians didn't intend for was the ceiling, which instantly caught fire. The crowd begins filing out in a neat row at first, but the orderly exit soon gives way to chaos. The nightclub is way overpacked and people can't get out of the small doorway fast enough. When the fire alarm goes off and smoke fills the room, the scene becomes more urgent. "Where's my husband?" one woman asks in a panic. Those who are farthest from the exit have the least chance of surviving. Most of them lie down to avoid the choking smoke, only to be slowly cooked alive as the flames grow taller. Their screams add to the panic as people realize there's nowhere to go. People are spilling out of windows and back alleys while on fire. The main doors are clogged by crushed bodies with nowhere to go. As one survivor puts it, people were bleeding and their skin was melting off, just dangling from their body. You could smell the burning flesh. The cameraman, Brian Butler, catches it all on tape. In a horrible and ironic twist, filming the concert was the idea of Dan Beachley, the stage technician who was ultimately responsible for the fire. If it wasn't for his idea to film, none of this would have been captured forever. Overall, there were more than 350 people in attendance, 100 more than what was legally allowed under the fire code. Aside from knowingly overcrowding the nightclub, the owners also did not have enough sprinklers. The station also had a long history of fire code violations that they never bothered to fix. 100 lives were lost. 3 years later, the station's two owners accept a plea deal and don't have to face trial. Jeffrey Dodarian was sentenced to 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. His brother Michael was sentenced to 4 years in a minimum security prison, along with 3 years probation upon release. He served 27 months before being released. Dan Beachley, 16 months of his 4-year sentence for his role in the accidental deaths. Many of the victims or their surviving family members weren't satisfied with his ruling and chose to further pursue the matter in civil court. In the summer of 2008, after almost 5 years of reviewing more than 700 pieces of evidence, a judge awarded a settlement of over $176 million to be distributed among the defendants. Hello everyone, Sir Aim here. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. It was pretty heavy, let me be honest. I've seen all of these videos and every single one of them are absolutely horrifying. If you want to cleanse your palate with perhaps some fictional horror instead of this real horror, come over to my channel and check it out. I'd be really glad to have you. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you later.